Hello everyone, welcome to my channel where learning art is fun. I'm Sarah and in today's video I'm going to do another stone painting, this time of Sherlock Gnomes from the movie that's coming out. And I did a stone painting last week which you all really seemed to enjoy, so if you haven't seen that then go and check it out. I'll put a link in the card above. So let's start straight off by securing our clean dry stone onto our desk using a piece of blue tack, plasticine or kneaded eraser. And that's just to make sure it doesn't wobble when we're painting. And the paints I'm using are going to be acrylic paints, and these are really good for painting pebbles, but if you haven't got these then you can use poster paint instead. So I'm going to start off by mixing these two colours, the blue and the white, together to get a fairly light blue, and I'm using it neat onto the pebble just to get a base coat down. And it's important not to add any water at this stage because that will water down your paint and make it more transparent and you'll need more layers of paint. So in between each layer it's important to let your stone or pebble dry, and then you can add another layer depending on how many layers or what colour you want and how dark your stone is and how much paint you need to cover it up. So I added a couple of coats and made sure that it was really dry before then going in with my pencil and marking out a base sketch for Sherlock Gnomes. And I began by making sure I'd got enough room above and below the face to allow for his hat and his body, and I just put some simple shapes on the stone just to mark out roughly where everything was going to go, and that was before I started painting. But it is important to realise that if you make a mistake, don't worry, because your paint will cover up any of those pencil lines. If you saw last week's video, you'll know that to draw the circles then I did use a template, but you can either draw freehand or use something to draw around if you're not happy to draw things freehand. So for the magnifying glass for Sherlock Gnomes today, I just did it freehand. So once I'd drawn out his face and his hat, I then went on to draw his body, or the top half of his body, his arm which is holding the magnifying glass, and the top part of his jacket and waistcoat. And once I'd done that, then it was time to start adding the paint. And the paintbrush I used for this was a round paintbrush, but it's important not to use your best paintbrush for this, so any paintbrush will do. And this looks like a really mushy pea kind of green, but the good thing about painting on stones is that if you're not happy with the colour, you can change it and go over the top of it afterwards. So at this stage I'm just marking out some basic sort of shapes and areas, not putting in too much detail at this point because we can add those in later. So now I've moved on to a really fine paintbrush, and that's just to add in the details on his face. And I've kind of used a terracotta colour for this, which is a bit orangey, but another good thing about using these acrylic paints is that you can go over with a lighter colour on top and it works really effectively, so you haven't got to worry about the colours mixing together because acrylic paints dry really quickly as well. So I just marked out a basic colour, and then as you can see I mixed this terracotta colour with a bit of white acrylic paint to get that lighter colour, which I've put on the left side of his face to get some highlights and just brighten up that side of his face. And then I'm just marking out the areas for his eyes and his beard. You might need a couple of coats of the lighter colours if you've used a quite bright base colour like I have. And then you can go in with a slightly darker colour again to add in areas of shadow, or if you think you've gone too light. So working with these paints on Pebbles is quite flexible and forgiving as well, so if you make any mistakes or you're not happy with something, you can just paint over them. One thing I would say about using acrylic paints is because they dry really quickly, it's important, so that you don't waste a lot of paint, not to put too much on your palette at one time. Having said that, you do need to make sure that you make enough of the colour that you want so that you don't run out and have to remix it again. So now we've got our base colours in, it's time to add a little bit more detail, and I just added some lighter green to the left side of his hat there. And if you want to add shading without changing the colour altogether, you can add a watered down mix, and that's called a glaze, and it's really useful to be able to add things like shadows and shading using a watered down version. But don't forget that you do need to make sure you wait for each layer to dry, otherwise you will lose the details that you've put in. So now I'm just adding a little bit of shadow and a few more details to the creases and areas where it would be darker. And now just adding in some more detail to the eyes by doing the eyebrows and some darker terracotta colour around the outside of his eyes, under his nose and around his mouth area. And there was a stage where I thought the face wasn't going to work, so I would say if you get to the point where you think it's not working, stick with it, because you can make it good in the end. And as I said, if you make any mistakes or you're not happy with things, you can just paint over them. So it's a good exercise in sticking with the project and seeing it through to the end, because if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have the finished pebble that I did. So now just going in and putting some of the pattern onto his hat and his jacket, and just using a lighter, I think it was almost a yellowy colour on top of the green. And here's a close-up of it so far, and I think at this point I decided that I would put in a few more details and finish up using my Pigma Micron pens. And this is a bit of a cheat, but it's a lot easier than using a really fine paintbrush. But it was really good to get around those details, to go around the magnifying glass, and also fill in any areas that I hadn't quite got to with my fine paintbrush. And it really helps to make the eyes and the features on his face stand out, so like his nostril, his mouth, and around the eye area. And then I decided to use my gold gel pen, and that was to do the magnifying glass and part of his waistcoat there, and I'll show you at the end, and it really stands out and sparkles, and it was a really nice touch. Now just adding some white gel pen, and that was just to add some highlight and go around and make the whole of Sherlock Gnome's characters stand out on the stone. And a few more touches and he was done. So I really enjoyed this little project, and I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If you have, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, comment and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I will see you again in the next video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.